This is The Extra Point, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast, sponsored by your Phoenix Suns.
All right, so we got 18 games to play in the Major League Baseball season for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Are they going to the playoffs? Do they have what it takes to maybe recapture the magic from 2023 and make another World Series run? Let's talk to an expert and go out to Jesse Friedman at PHNX, who's been covering this team every day for the past, 162 minus 18. Don't ask me to do math, but at this point in the season, how's your energy level?
You know, Mark, it's not great. I'm not going to lie, but, only 18 games left. Of course, I might have said something similar last year at this time, and I wound up working for an entire month beyond that. So we'll see how it plays out.
All right, so you kind of got to put up your money here because, booking hotels in the postseason. Have you allowed yourself to maybe start looking at different options when it comes to flights, budgets, everything like that for a postseason run? Or would that jinx the whole thing?
Yeah, I guess for a while it seemed like the Padres are maybe the most likely first round opponent. That's sort of how things have looked for a while, where the Diamondbacks and Padres were in those top two wild card spots. That's how things stand right now. And that felt fairly secure as of a week or two ago. The Braves, the Mets, some of those other teams were fairly distant, from the D-backs and Padres at the top there. But obviously that gap has closed considerably here in the last week or two, with the Mets playing extremely well and the Braves kind of hanging around as well. So I'm reminded, especially given the roller coaster that September was a year ago, you really never know how things are going to go this time of year. Are the Diamondbacks going to make it? How many wins will it take? All these questions. I can provide some sort of analysis, but my real answer is I have absolutely no idea.
How many wins do you think it will take for the Diamondbacks to get to the postseason?
Yeah, I guess again, it's impossible to really pinpoint something like that. The Diamondbacks, with the pace that they've played at this season, they're on pace for 90 wins. So they're on with the way that they've played over the course of the season, a 10-8 record over their final 18 is maybe what you would expect. But again, so much of this is connected to how these other teams play. If the Mets continue to play how they've played recently, and the Braves continue to be formidable as well, it could take 14 wins to get in the playoffs. But there's also a scenario where it could take 6 or 7. If even just one of those teams falls off a little bit. I think it's important to remember that the scenario where the Diamondbacks don't make the postseason is not just where the Mets pass them or a scenario where the Braves pass them. It really has to be both of those teams. Both of those teams have to pass them, and the Padres have to stay ahead as well. I know there's a couple other teams in the mix technically as well, in the Cubs and the Giants, but yeah, they're in a good position. All that to say, they're in a good position, but there's a lot of factors here at play with exactly how many wins it's going to take.
What would be the starting pitching staff for a playoff series?
Yeah, we were talking about that on our show today. I don't think it's super obvious right now. Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly, you pretty much could pencil those guys in 1-2. I know neither of them has been as sharp in recent days. Gallen, of course, threw 6 no-hit innings the other day in San Francisco. That was a big step in the right direction. Merrill Kelly also pitched a lot better in that series, but Kelly has had a strange year, missing about 4 months with a shoulder injury and just coming back. But regardless, those guys, with what they meant to you last year during that postseason run, I think it's obvious that your rotation starts there. I also look at a guy like Brandon Pfaadt, who was so big for this team during the playoffs last year, had an ERA right around 3, and obviously the most important games that he pitched all season. So I'm not going to say it's a lock, but it's hard for me to envision a D-backs playoff rotation that doesn't include him. And then you need 4 guys, right? So I guess that last spot would maybe come down to Eduardo Rodriguez or Brandon Pfaadt. And certainly with the investment the Diamondbacks made there in Rodriguez over the offseason, you definitely would expect him to occupy a postseason rotation spot. But it's been a little bit of a rough go for him. He's in a similar situation as Merrill, where coming off the injured list, things haven't looked as sharp. He struggled again the other day in Houston. So, and obviously Ryan Nelson, despite what happened in his most recent start, has been really, really good for the Diamondbacks for the last couple of months. So there's still some potential moving parts there for sure.
Does Jordan Montgomery get another start as a member of the Arizona Diamondbacks?
This year, it feels like probably no. He's sort of settled into that long reliever role at this stage in the season. We saw him in that spot again in Houston, a game where the Diamondbacks trailed big, and you'd hate to use any of your other relievers in that spot. You can just throw Montgomery in that game and at least save a lot of those other guys. So yeah, this season it feels like that's kind of what he's going to be the rest of the way, but he's in an interesting contract situation where he has this player option for next year that has already vested at $22.5 million based on the number of starts that he did make this year. And I don't want to say it's a lock that he necessarily picks up that player option for next year, but it seems likely given just the way that this season has gone for him. Obviously, an ERA in the mid sixes. This is not the season that he was hoping to have, and it feels like he's probably going to come back next year and try to reestablish his value before maybe hitting the market again next winter.
I can't imagine that the Diamondbacks, when they were planning for this season, said, the strength of our team is going to be our record-setting offense. Did that ever come up in conversation?
It did not. No. In fact, if anything, it was sort of the opposite. Not that the Diamondbacks thought their offense would be poor by any means, but they've talked a lot about how they're not the type of team that's going to outslug you, that's going to hit 4 homers a game or whatnot. And I mean, I guess in some ways that's been true. The Diamondbacks don't lead the majors in home runs, but they're certainly in the top half of the league in that regard. And when it comes to just scoring runs in general, they are far and away the best offense in the league. So yeah, I don't really think they saw that coming. I didn't see that coming personally by any means. But look, it's a really well-rounded group. It's not just the star power they have in the middle with Ketel Marte, who recently returned from injury, and Christian Walker, who's back now as well. Jock Peterson's had an extraordinary season, but it's also the guys at the bottom of the lineup. It's Kevin Newman and Geraldo Perdomo and Eugenio Suarez having an extremely dramatic turnaround here over the last couple of months. The Diamondbacks have arguably the most well-rounded lineup in the league, and it's led to, as we've been saying, just a whole bunch of runs being scored throughout the course of this season.
Would you expect Pavin Smith to be in the lineup tomorrow and almost every game going forward if he is going to stay this hot?
That's a tough one. I mean, as of right now, the Diamondbacks are in kind of a weird position from a roster construction standpoint. I mean, you really have 3 first basemen on the team right now, in Christian Walker, who's now back, Josh Bell, who stepped in and did a really nice job replacing him while he was on the injured list, and then Pavin Smith, who's been here for a while as well. And of course, Smith has a little bit of versatility. We've seen him play in the outfield as well. But yeah, I mean, as long as Pavin Smith has an OPS that starts with a 9, I think it's 905 after his 3 home run game yesterday. It's hard to imagine a scenario where the Diamondbacks take a guy like that and send him back down to Reno or anything. But it's going to be hard to find him reps. I mean, once Christian Walker kind of finds a rhythm and is able to play every day, I know they've been sort of slow playing him up to this point. It's going to be hard to find Pavin at bats, right? I mean, you've got Jock Peterson, of course, is your primary DH against right-handed pitching. Walker's going to be basically an everyday player. I guess right now there's a bit of a window with Lourdes Gurriel Jr. being on the IL, and I think that's why you've seen Pavin get some playing time here recently. But once Gurriel gets back, it's going to be even more of a traffic jam than it is already. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Was that the most powerful display by a Diamondback hitter since JD Martinez's 4 home run game?
I think so. I mean, there have been other 3 homer games for sure. Eugenio Suarez had one earlier this year, but for a variety of factors, I would say yes. I mean, number one, you're facing a future Hall of Famer in Justin Verlander, right? Number 2, it was 8 RBI altogether. It was a 3-run shot right off the bat in the 2nd inning, and then it was a grand slam the very next inning against, again, one of the best pitchers who's ever stepped foot on a mound. And beyond that, I mean, this is just Pavin Smith stepping up in a really big moment. This was a game on ESPN on Sunday Night Baseball. It was a national TV stage that the Diamondbacks don't get all that often, and obviously a really important game for them as well. You really wanted to come away with at least one win against a really tough Houston Astros team, and if Pavin doesn't go off the way that he did on Sunday, I'm not sure that happens.
Well, could the momentum carry over this week with the Rangers and the Brewers coming to town? Do you believe that momentum carries over game to game, city to city in Major League Baseball?
Yeah, momentum is such a tricky thing in this sport. Some people are not really convinced it exists at all. Others are convinced that it's basically everything and plays a really important role on the day-to-day basis. I probably fall somewhere in between on that spectrum. I think the Diamondbacks are a talented team overall, and more than anything, I think they're going to play well the rest of the season because of the talent on the roster, especially now that you have a Ketel Marte back and you have a Christian Walker back. But yeah, maybe there is some momentum that carries over. Again, it was a big stage on ESPN. It was against a really good team and a pitcher who's obviously done a lot of incredible things over the course of his career. So I guess we'll find out here over these next few days.
With the defending world champs coming to town and they have not had the season, they've kind of been suffering from the hangover of winning a world championship, the Rangers right here in Arizona. What do we expect Tuesday, Wednesday, and then with the Brew Crew and Pat Murphy, the former Sun Devil manager, coming here this weekend? What does it look like for the Diamondbacks to have a successful week here in the desert?
I mean, I think Tuesday is going to be fascinating because it's Zach Allen against Nathan Eovaldi, which is the exact pitching matchup in Game 5 of the World Series. Of course, the last game of that series that also happened at Chase Field, it was a rough one for the Diamondbacks. So obviously this isn't a postseason stage, but maybe an opportunity for some revenge there, at least in a small way. And yeah, the Milwaukee Brewers are a really good baseball team. What Pat Murphy has done there has been really, really impressive. I think Murphy is one of the front runners for Manager of the Year in the National League, if not the front runner. That's a team that traded its best pitcher over the offseason in Corbin Burns, and you could argue that this year's iteration of the Brewers is even better than it was a year ago. Jackson Chourio is a really big part of what they've done this season as well, a 20-year-old who's come up and been one of the better players in baseball these last few months. So yeah, even with the Rangers, a team that hasn't played well this year, but they've won 4 consecutive series coming into this series, this 2-game set on Tuesday and Wednesday. So it's not going to be easy for the Diamondbacks. What does success mean? I guess you'd like to win a majority of these games. But again, with the way that some of these other teams in the wild card race have been playing, just winning a slight majority hasn't necessarily been enough to keep up with those teams in recent days. So we'll sort of see what that looks like.
If this playoff run comes down to, say, a 9th inning in a save situation, who do you think Torey Lovullo gives the ball to?
Right now, the answer is Justin Martinez. And I have to believe that that's going to continue to be the answer until something changes. And I'm not sure if a change there is Justin Martinez struggling, which is something we have seen a little bit recently. I believe he's been scored upon in 7 of his last 10 outings. He still has not blown a save since being moved into that closer role. But we've seen him be a little bit more hittable here over these last couple of weeks. Paul Sewald, Torey Lovullo has said time and time again that he really wants to get Sewald back into the closer role at some point. He has refused to use the word closer to describe Martinez or anyone throughout this entire process. He ultimately wants it to land back on Sewald, but you're going to need Sewald to show some things. You're going to need Sewald to really show that he's found a way to turn things around. And I think he's looked better overall since being moved out of the closer role, but you saw him give up a run again the other day to the Astros. I think his ERA is 4.15, something like that, since being moved out of that closer role. So he's been all right, but it hasn't been the kind of turnaround that maybe you would have envisioned. So things could change for sure. We've still got 3 weeks to go, but right now it's Justin Martinez in the 9th, and I have to believe that that's how it's going to continue for the time being.
Would it surprise you if the Diamondbacks did not make the postseason?
I would be surprised. I think Fangraphs puts their playoff odds right now at 84%, something like that, entering play on Monday. So do with that what you will. But yeah, I would be surprised. I mean, they're in a good spot, right? They have this game and a half cushion on both the Braves and the Mets. Again, it's not just one of those teams that passes them that would leave them out of the playoffs. It have to be both of those teams that would pass them, along with the Padres staying ahead as well. So I think on paper they're in a good spot, and based on the talent on this team, that's what I kind of keep going back to. The rotation has had its struggles, the bullpen has had its struggles, especially over these last few weeks. But you've still got a lot of talent on this roster. You've still got Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly at the top. You've still got an emerging young starter in Brandon Pfaadt, who I think is good. Eduardo Rodriguez has been a much better pitcher than what he's shown so far, pretty much his entire career. And this offense, as we discussed earlier, has scored more runs than anyone else in baseball by a wide margin this year. And I can only expect that to maybe even get better down the stretch now that this offense is getting a little bit healthier again. So, yeah, I think it's an easy bet to make in some ways on paper, but you never know what's going to happen, right? I mean, last season, the Diamondbacks seemed to be in comfortable position to make the playoffs. And then toward the end, they lost a whole bunch of games and it got sort of dicey. They didn't clinch until the second to last day of the season. So it's more competitive this year. The bar is certainly set higher than it was a year ago. So, yeah, again, we'll just have to kind of see how it plays out.
And where can we catch you throughout this entire run to see if the Diamondbacks make the playoffs?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can find me on Twitter, of course, for people who are who enjoy that sort of thing, who are willing to enter the fray. I'm at Jesse N. Friedman over there. All of my written content for PHNX is over at gophnx.com. And then we also do our own Diamondbacks podcast 5 days a week, which you can find on all of the podcast apps, Spotify, so on and so forth, as well as on our YouTube channel. Which is at PHNX_sports.
Well, here's to post-game shows all the way through the month of October once again.
We'll see what happens, Mark. Some time off, I wouldn't hate it, but last year it was a fun ride covering a team all the way to the very end. So if that's how it turns out, I'm all for that as well.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for giving us some time here on Arizona's Family.
No problem, Mark. My pleasure.